Welcome here. True virtue. It's an alarming place we find ourselves in history. It's hard to find virtue in any institution or leaders. If we look back, sages and mystics of all religious traditions, as well as atheist philosophers, Socrates, Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius, people in whom we can discern virtue, tell us that the way of virtue is possible, but requires thoughtfulness, humility, and self-discipline practice. To drop the ego's dominion over you requires the practice of steady virtue. Perceptions alter, and suddenly there are eyes to see and ears to hear. Jesus, in whom there was no guile at all, is the preeminent expression of a virtuous person. And he addressed the requirements of virtue in his teachings, which point us to enter and to live in God's realm, or, as often translated, God's kingdom. He teaches that this way of being in God is present already, and its expression in you is close at hand. God is indeed with us, in Him, and even shockingly, in you. Yet experiencing that truth and living it requires letting go of the not God realm. This is not as unusual or as difficult as it may sound. Entry requires us to be like a child, not childish, but childlike, that is, innocent of guile. The personal me realm can be quieted, and when it is experienced as clarity and peace, we know we are drawing into the kingdom. Jesus is clear in his teaching on this, to stay awake, bright and clear, not running around in a mental fog. It's not entirely unusual, and I'm sure you will have experienced it many times, at least in flashes. Sometimes this inbreak of God's love is experienced spontaneously, usually briefly. It has a very particular quality, and often there's a strong desire to share the experience, and equally often a complete inability to put it into words. What happens internally at these times is that the ego is knocked, albeit briefly, off its surety, its pedestal, and its constant dialogue. Sometimes this happens as the mind grows bored and grows quiet. With no way of producing distraction or amusement, it goes into a sort of sleep mode. The mind is stilled. This happens in ordinary tasks, the very kind of tasks we try to avoid a lot or see as boring and inglorious. Sweeping, chopping wood, sewing, gardening, cooking, polishing shoes. You may have experienced such a time when the mind drops away and you entered the peace and illuminated clarity. Children, like animals, inhabit this understanding always. All being is experienced like this by them. Being mindful, being attentive, being fully present, these sorts of tasks bypass the ego mind, and wisdom is revealed. At other times, our ego's clamour is silenced in times of profound suffering and loss. there is nothing left for the ego to say. We are broken and open and vulnerable. The shallow way has nothing to offer. It feels flimsy and fake. But at the same time, the deeper wisdom grows out of this suffering. Again, sometimes the ego way of being is shut down by the beauty of the natural world, or the realization of the vastness of the cosmos and the smallness of the I. Life, especially new life in all its forms, the miracle when a child is born. To most adults, these sorts of experiences may come and then things sort of flip back, though the feeling was familiar. We were all little children once. And this deep resonance with these experiences identifies them to us as important, suddenly wordless, or thoughtless, awestruck. Polishing virtue allows us, little by little, to live in the full and permanent realization of God, to understand Jesus' teachings deeply. It requires discipline until perfected in a mysterious and permanent encounter with the Absolute or God. In Advent, Christians are asked to undertake this exact path, to polish their virtue, to use prayer, the prayer of inward contemplation, to fast from time to time, to study, and to exercise untainted compassion. These practices are observed in religious houses in daily living, and in churches they are predominantly addressed in Advent and Lent. There are other virtues that can be attended to with great benefit, humility for example. But here in Advent these are the focus, because in fact they are straightforward, and so long as they are not pursued for ego gain or in the illusion of self-righteousness, they will increase the wisdom that is necessary to respond to the incarnation, which we are preparing to house in our hearts. First, prayer. Make an offering of your stillness and quiet through inner collection and times of meditation or contemplation. The prayer of contemplation is the preeminent way of polishing virtue. Unless you find determination, this practice may seem to be a waste of time. Certainly the ego will suggest that. But this stilling and focusing awareness on the internal life, internal emotions, thoughts, dialogue, drivers, is the first and most effective way to reduce the influence of the inferior or non-virtuous elements battling or even raging within us, so making it possible for wisdom to be revealed and to proffer further guidance. There's no need to make our ego nature disappear. In fact, straining for that is simply another ego trap. Look instead for the ego drivers to gradually relinquish full control, submitting little by little to its proper place, no longer driving every thought and every action from a vain and entirely false idea of self-interest, and with it, in its wake, come dark motivations in personal and cultural lives, where cruelty and depravity can be born. The ego, once stilled, can take its hands off the wheel of the car that it only imagines it's driving. So without ambition, quiet practice can lead us to find wisdom within. There is a letting go in good nature rather than a struggle. Take time and persevere. Be patient and be gentle. As you move into the truth or the light, in which our suffering, sorrows, and even death are transcended, the prayer of inward contemplation gently guides. It requires of us a somewhat courageous self-discipline. Life will surely present challenges to following through. If you are restless or preoccupied, stay the distance. It will pass. Practice your virtue regularly over Advent and ideally beyond. Find a time and an undistracted place for quiet recollection, alone, sitting but not dozing, or walking again alone. Stay awake, shining your awareness on your thoughts as they arise, watching as they take a hold and then drift away, not battling them. This practice reveals thoughts are passing forms. It is the awareness that does not vary. Passing forms lack truth, the permanent truth of God, of the eternal, the omnipresent. And as we stay with the always present, that awareness, it grows beautifully and naturally. If you maintain this simple practice, you become adept at sinking into God's presence, and in time may find courage to sink even deeper, letting go further into that which lies even beyond the awareness. That is a teaching for another time. But note in passing that Jesus taught disciples to pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done." The next virtue we're polishing up is using the polishing cloth of fasting. Fasting varies in the way it is applied, from giving up some self-indulgence, some food maybe, or another fuel like social media or TV or the news, or fasting from eating anything at all for a period. And this is a powerful tool. Notice when the hunger arises, suggesting just grabbing that thing, just doing that thing. Feel it, discern its outlines, and bring the light of awareness onto it fully, superseding that impulse with the more primary desire to grow wisdom and to know God. The next polishing cloth is study. As wisdom grows, the intellect can in fact help. It can also hinder if it's running off here and there, but it can help by study, not so much to accumulate facts, but learning the other path, seeing where the gate is on the map. So study Jesus' teaching, something like a parable a week, read every day, or one of his sermons, or observing him with others as described in the Gospels, perhaps in the evening, perhaps in the morning, just extra time dedicated to learning and reminding oneself of Jesus' way. The final polishing cloth is the giving of alms. A better way to describe that might be acts of pure compassion. These acts must not be understood to be about signalling any virtue to others or to yourself. It's nothing to do with being seen to be good or assuring oneself that one is good. Instead, a genuine and immediate act of compassion, especially as you meet suffering in the world. Do not outsource this compassion to a charity. That's not to say don't give to a charity, but this business of giving alms is from my hand to yours. It's meant to be direct and a response from a heart in full awareness of any reluctance that arises or any argument that the wide world might offer up. This is what Teresa of Calcutta advised when she said, "Do something beautiful for God." So these are the Advent disciplines, or a more useful term might be practices, things to work on to polish virtue and so draw near and enter the God realm, the God way, or holiness. Not because God perceives your virtue and therefore lets you in, but because until living out of the heart's wisdom, there is no childlike, innocent quality that is the prerequisite of entering God's realm. So we can, with this action of polishing virtue, move towards the kingdom and move away from the illusory fog of our own mind's creation. Learning to live in the heart, enlightenment comes. The light shines for us and through us, and finally in us. In Advent, we discern the tide of mystery is rising. You can feel it coming in. A beautiful child is born, the Christ, coming into the world which that same Christ created, which tragically the human world does not know, and so evil grows. The Christ became flesh, and from this person's utter fullness we have all received grace upon grace. This Christ, who knows God, has made God known to you.